Hello, this is the chapter on sculpture by me, Carlina. This is Spring 2023, Studio Thinking, ARU 330. So sculpture consists of various materials and ways to use those materials. Some of these materials include wire mesh and foil, paper mache, wood, natural materials, found objects, clay, basically anything you can put together. Sculptural artists that I would like to feature here are Deirdre Fox, who I found in the textbook. She uses a lot of found objects, and also Duke Riley, who had his Long Live Trash exhibit just this month at the Brooklyn Museum. He takes trash and paints it, puts it together. Here he made fishing lures out of things he found. Found object sculpture is one of the biggest things I used during my exploration of sculpture. In order to have my found objects, one of the things I did was empty out my school bag, and I found a couple random crayons, air dry clay, and I also had a collection of broken ceramics from a trip to Goggleworks that I took last semester. I decided to lay everything out on my table and explore what I had and see how I can use them. The textbook had an array of things to do in sculpture, so one of the things that I chose was making a residential sculpture. So I had a few tools. I had pencils, I had a sandpaper block, I had my X-Acto knife, and I had a bottle of Elmer's clear glue, and I also actually had nail glue. I also had a couple Sharpies laying around and things like that. So I did a little bit of trial and error before I started. I wanted to see how certain things reacted to what I wanted to do. I quickly found out that the air dry clay that I did have in my bag was dry. I tried to add some water to it and mush it together, and it just wasn't having it, so it was dried out. This was something that I could not use. So this was where I started finding my limitations, which one of my limitations was actually only using the things that I had on hand. So since this was something that I really did plan to be in my sculpture, the fact that I couldn't use it was a little bit of a roadblock. But as we will continue, you'll see that I got through that. I have a glue gun, however, it is nowhere to be found, at least not in my dorm room. So I had to go without that, which was another limitation. And I was planning to use cardboard, however, this was something that I am very comfortable with. So this actually pushed me to use things that I'm not so comfortable with, which I found to be actually a more freeing experience and a more exploratory experience for myself. So assemblage with my found items, I decided to use a ceramic mug that I have. Obviously it's broken because this is one of the ceramic things that I found that were broken. As you can see, I use some of the other ceramic things that were broken for other things, but I use this for this project. So part of sculpture is subtractive and additive. So I only did one time of subtractive, well, at least on the ceramics, mug, where I took that little edge and I just whacked it off. I took another piece of ceramic because, as you notice, my tools does not include having a hammer. So again, this was a limitation, but I found something else to whack off that side. So this actually left me with a nice, like, sort of symmetrical opening, but also not symmetrical opening. But it was open enough to where I was happy with it, so I continued on working. Here's a picture of a little torch that I made carving a crayon, so I guess this would be another subtractive element where I just carved the crayon a little bit until it looked more like the shape of a little torch. And then I took the wrapper of the crayon and I super glued it with my nail glue to the top of it and crumbled it up to make a little flame. Um, I also took a piece of charcoal and put it with this little green rubber toy. I cut some of the ends off and I took that little piece of charcoal, glued them together, and I made a little fern plant, which we will see in the next slide. But I also do want to point out that I took some paper that I had. I have some textured paper. I mean, not textured, patterned paper. And I put it as a little rug and some wallpaper in the back. And then I took some red paper and I pleated it to make another type of wallpaper. Here I took some buttons and erasers and I cut them up and super glued them together and made a little dining table and some chairs. And then also here you could see my little charcoal fern plant. So these are all things that I was doing. However, my thought process throughout the whole thing was, how can I take anything that I had and make it into what would be a living space? So I didn't want the walls to be bare. I didn't want it just to look straight like a mug on the inside. I wanted it to have a little bit more of a homey feel. So this is where I went in and I put in the papers to kind of make it more homey. And I was going between the idea of making it a bathroom or a kitchen. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but as soon as I saw the buttons, I just saw dining table. So luckily I did have those little erasers and everything worked out the way I would have wanted it to, I guess. My form of exploration when it comes to new projects and materials is trial and error while I am doing it. One of my errors was also the Elmer's glue seeping through the paper here, and you can kind of see that in my final project as well, or product. So I did just kind of say my paper techniques. I pleated the paper here, folding it, in and out, and then I also made a little stove from a piece of cardstock, folding it into, a square, and I decided to use Stark cardstock because it's a little more sturdy, and this is where I learned that I will be using the nail glue to glue it down because it's a lot sturdier and dries a lot quicker. So, and again, I crumbled the paper on the torches to make it look like a little, crumbly fire. Then I did a couple finishing touches to, again, make it a little more homey. I added a little star bead, and then on the table, I took a piece of, like, the tip of a thumbtack and another piece of that rubber toy, and then I painted the top of it to make it look like kind of like a tulip. My intention with this is to make it look like an empty kitchen that has recently been used or is still being occupied, but is just simply not at the moment. So, and then I, placed the fern on their little windowsill. The way it broke just happened to be a good spot. So some of my reflections of this project was the diversity of my materials. I was actually really inspired by the mug as soon as I got it, which was last semester. And I've not had the time to do what I wanted to do with it. And if I did have access to a glue gun and maybe a hammer, I would have done probably something a little bit different, but I am happy with like how this turned out. I did learn some things about different materials that I was using in a non-traditional way, such as crayons. I didn't color with them, I carved them. They are extremely easy to carve. It was like carving into a stick of chocolate, but it's also very easy to break them. Elmer's glue takes a very long time to dry, as I have mentioned a couple times. The nail glue was very quick in drying, and that helped a lot. It was one of my favorite tools to use. I used it almost on everything in this project, especially for some of the things like the torches and the bead. some of the things that needed a little more help sticking and staying. Working small was really fun, however, it was really challenging. My entire thought process was like, I'm gonna break something, or I'm going to drop it, or my hands are too shaky. Um, and then there is a book called The Borrowers. They also made a movie. So it's basically a story of a bunch of like tiny people, and they're like in a family, and they live in a regular sized people's houses, and they are actually like the palm of your hand size, like little kind of fairies, but without wings, and they borrow things such as buttons and pins and things like that that they use for themselves in their little tiny homes, to make something similar to like the dining set that I have here. They make little functional items for themselves out of tiny, tiny things that are tiny to us, but regular size to them. So I was kind of thinking about this book the entire time that I was making. And if I were to make like a little mug house village type of thing, with stairs and stuff, I would love to add to this project and, make a little upstairs that leads to another mug that's like a little bedroom. So I think that this was a success for exploring different materials. Another thing about sculpture is it's a very broad topic that I learned. Um, Anything you use, whether it's clay or ceramics or found objects, there's going to be a little bit of overlap sometimes, especially with paper and board and found objects. So I also found that very interesting because I did find myself, using paper and wanting to use cardboard, but again, my adhesion materials were not up to code for being able to do so like successfully. And yeah, I found this very interesting to do, and I learned a lot in my process. Thank you.